Hello, everyone, and welcome into episode 88 of the Stomp the Bus Show. I'm your host, Mark Harris, and we've got a lot of realignment stuff to talk about here on this episode. Solo episode for me today, and let's just get into it. We're a part of the College Huddle podcast network. You can follow the College Huddle at College Huddle, spelled how it sounds, on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And then they also have a website at thecollegehuddle.com. A lot of great work done there. All sorts of teams, conferences represented. It's just a lot of fans like myself doing it. So you get some really good information there. And I've been able to jump on a few College Huddle podcasts, jumped on the Cincinnati one, jumped on the Oklahoma State one earlier this year. A lot of great people working for it and just creating good content. So please check out all the partner shows as well. And make sure to check out the Florida State and Clemson College Huddle shows because they might be in the Big 12. Last episode, Colton and I mentioned the possibility of that following Ross Dellinger's reporting that they had been in touch. And ever since then, in the past week, the reporting has just amped up. Jason Shear, 24/7 Sports Arizona reporter, runs wildcatauthority.com. He posted a tweet saying that there is internal belief in the Big 12 that Florida State and Clemson will be a part of the conference within, I think the phrasing he had was the next year or so. I'm looking that up right now. And that kind of really got the ball rolling in addition to Dellinger's reporting. But what really set things on fire was Brett McMurphy of the Action Network reporting on, this would be Tuesday, reporting on Tuesday that, quote, sources, Big Ten, SEC, unlikely to add Florida State if ACC survives. This is the main sentence in it. However, there are multiple sources, or there are multiple concerns about adding Florida State. Sources said those reasons include the fact that it doesn't make financial sense for either league. Quote, there's no appetite for more expansion, and quote, FSU has shown it's not a good partner. And the lead of this is Florida State likely will not have a spot in the Big Ten or SEC if it's successful in leaving the ACC and the ACC stays intact. Sources told Action Network. So that's a pretty couched statement with the ACC stays intact. So this is by no means a done deal or anything like that. Here, let me read Shear's tweet. So this was on Sunday. According to sources, there is an internal belief that the Big 12, that Florida State and Clemson are likely to join the conference within the next year or so. So that's also not concrete language either. And then also earlier this week, Josh Pate of the Late Kick Show kind of built off McMurphy's reporting and kind of confirmed a lot of the things that McMurphy said. And so all of this is to say that, like, the Florida State and Clemson train to the Big 12 is much, much more realistic than anyone would have thought, especially like 2 weeks ago. There's been just more and more reporting coming out. And it's still crazy to me, honestly, that the Big 12 could end up being the conference that those two schools go to, because they've been so deadlocked on getting to the Big Ten or the SEC. Understandably, pretty much every school in, major college football is trying to get into one of those two conferences, if we're being honest. So it's just not a done deal that they're going to wind up in one of those conferences. And maybe the ACC falls apart in the process of them leaving, and then the Big Ten or SEC, open the doors to let them in. Big Ten has the AAU requirement, or soft requirement. I don't know how much that'll actually matter. Maybe they just don't want to be down there with those schools. Who knows? SEC already has schools in those states, but again, I still feel like they would like if they're on the, if they're actually out there, it's hard to see the SEC passing on them, but they don't seem to want them. So it's just kind of confusing, because as a now Big 12 school, right, or fan of a now Big 12 school, it's very exciting to see these rumors of Florida State and Clemson potentially coming into the conference, right? Like it adds two legitimate national brands, legitimate national championship contenders within the past, I'll just say the past decade, throw the 2013 Florida State championship in that time frame, even though it's 11 years, but it's all the same. Uh, it's it's so it's just it's so exciting and so tempting. And I really just want to be like, oh, they're just going to come here and be in the conference and it's going to be awesome. There's still a big part of me that thinks a lot of this is just kind of negotiating through the media. And of course, you have to, Bud Elliott, who's a Florida State guy, Cover Three podcast, like he had a thread of all the court cases that are going on related to the NCAA and the court cases between Florida State and the ACC. And then you throw in the fact that, last year at this time, there was a lot of sources that were saying Oregon and Washington, like the Big Ten doesn't want them. And then all of a sudden they end up in the Big Ten. So I'm throwing all that out there just to establish the kind of reality that we're facing. But it appears that it appears like there's a legitimate, I don't know, 35% chance they end up in the Big 12. And that's so the fact that it's a legitimate, realistic possibility that's not complete just message board hogwash is such a great place to be for the Big 12. And I mean, you see the other ACC schools that are linked to the Big 12, Miami, that would be a great ad. I know Miami, I think Miami's been just about as good as ASU in the past 20, definitely the past 15 years, that's for sure. And you could probably say the past, I don't know, maybe like 17-ish years. The end of the Coker era was still good, but that's beside the point. Like Miami still has a big brand. They still recruit at a very high level. Even if they haven't been able to figure it all out, they do at least recruit at a very high level, and that's good. And then you have a school like a Louisville. Louisville is a bunch of NIL. They've been a pretty successful program in the past, 15 or so years. This is how good Louisville has been as a program. They've had Lamar Jackson, and that wasn't even when their team was the best in terms of a win-loss standings, right? Like probably the Teddy Bridgewater team that won the Sugar Bowl probably like 10, 12 years ago. That team had a better record, I believe, than either of Lamar Jackson's teams. And I mean, last year they won 10 games. So like that's a legit program you're bringing in, not a national championship contender, but a legit, really good program. And the other two you hear are Virginia Tech, kind of put them in the same bin as Louisville. They've, obviously from, like the late 90s and the like early 2010s was their heyday. Still a really good program, solid fan base. They've had some rough times in the 2010s and they're kind of getting things back on track with Brent Pry this season. But it's a good ad. That would absolutely be a good ad. It would fit with the vibe of the Big 12. It's right next to West Virginia. And then, the other school is NC State. And I think NC State would be a great ad as well. NC State doesn't have the kind of peak years of the Virginia Tech or a Louisville or Miami, but it's very consistent. It's a very consistent like 8-9 win program. And they may lose a few games that are really annoying, but then you look at the end of the year and they're 8-4 or they're whatever. So they're definitely not the flashiest program. They're not the sexiest program. And I'm talking about football. I mean, this is what all these decisions are based around football. Like otherwise UConn would already be in the conference, right? So NC State basketball coming off the Final Four run, that helps. I don't think that that's the really going to sway any decision maker, but it helps. So yeah, I think NC State would be a good ad. And I'm going to say this right now, like if the Big 12 comes out of this with Miami, Louisville, NC State, Virginia Tech, those four, and maybe you put it, maybe you swap one of them out for Pitt, or who knows how Duke plays into all this. But I'm just going to say those four: Miami, Virginia Tech, Louisville, and NC State. That is a huge win for the Big 12. It just gives you more depth, more competitive depth of just good programs. It's not like adding the BYU and the three group of five schools 2 years ago. That was more of like a survival move. Adding, those four ACC schools is just strengthening up your number, strengthening up your depth. And with Miami, you have at least a program that tangentially has a chance of winning, of really going far. It's still hypothetical and theoretical at this point because it's just been so long since they've been a true national championship contender. But they've done it before. They have the trophies, they have the brand, they have the swag. So it's still a good addition. And I mean, going back to Florida State and Clemson, I mean, I'm still wary of the private equity stuff. I am. If there was a way that the private equity burden primarily goes to Clemson and Florida State and not the current member schools of the Big 12, then sign me up. I don't care at all about if Clemson's, I don't even know what, I don't know, cross country team has to, get cut because they're in debt to private equity 10 years from now. That's not my problem. But if it happens to ASU, then that's a different story, So there just is a risk with private equity bringing that on. However, it might be worth the risk if you can add those two programs. It really would be. And I know that there's been some, I don't know, I'd say conversation in some corners of the Big 12 from what I've listened to that has along the lines of, oh, we just got rid of Texas and they were a disruptive partner and they, had a huge ego and they always wanted to be controlling everything and they wanted, all this status and they were a pain in the ass behind the scenes, and all of this applies to Florida State as well. So why should we bring them in? Or oh, like this will just, this will make it harder to win the league, or this will make, have the pie that everyone's divided up, every slice gets even thinner. And just kind of a lot of just like our general sentiments of, oh, are we really sure we should even add Florida State and Clemson? Like it was like we're in a good spot right now as the Big 12, all this. And I just can't disagree with that more. I cannot disagree with that line of thinking more, because the Big 12 does not have a national championship contender in the conference as it stands. Okay. Maybe, 5 years from now with NIL and all sorts of different changes in the sport, and who knows, like maybe someone does actually legitimately compete for a national championship. But it seemed just, again, Utah, Kansas State, and Oklahoma State are the best programs in your conference. None of those schools have made the 14 playoff. Okay. None of them did. The closest any of them have gotten to winning a national championship was probably 2011 when Oklahoma State should have played for the national championship. I don't think they were going to beat that LSU team. I think that team had Tyrann Mathieu and Patrick Peterson, just dudes everywhere, and Alabama was Alabama. Like, I just, anyway, that's a hypothetical. But that's kind of the best, like the peak of what we've seen. And then you can throw TCU in that mix as well. Just, I mean, they did play for a national championship recently, and they did beat Michigan to get there. They weren't just awarded it. It's tough to really consider them a national championship contender with how they got blown out against Georgia. Like I don't know. I mean, maybe that's short-sighted thinking. Maybe TCU is some booster that just super drives them and, then they become a national championship contender. I don't know. But Clemson and Florida State, you have the proof of concept, right? You have the proof of concept. Even with Florida State last year, like had Jordan Travis not get hurt, they would have made the college football playoff. I don't know. I don't think they would have won it. I don't think they were better than Michigan. And I think they could have beat Texas. I think that Washington's offense was just too reliable. And I sure, they didn't do well against Michigan's defense, but Washington's offense was, I mean, I'm sorry, like Florida State's defense wasn't Michigan's defense. So anyway, they're a legitimate national championship contender. No one, you don't need to talk anyone into thinking Florida State can win a national championship. You don't need to, make some weird, like it wouldn't have to be like a fluky run that gets them there, right? Like you can just imagine them doing it because they've done it and they have the history and they have the fan base and they have, both of these are huge stadiums. I think they would both be the biggest stadiums in the Big 12. Clemson, I'm actually more worried about Clemson as a long-term national championship contender just because their success is so tied to Dabo Swinney, right? Florida State, it's not, right? Bobby Bowden won multiple national championships. I almost forgot his name. Jimbo Fisher obviously won one and made the college football playoff again. And then again, Norvell likely wouldn't have won it last year, but they still went undefeated and won the conference, right? And they you could reasonably call them a national championship contender. So you have three different coaches who've done it to varying degrees at Florida State. Whereas, at Clemson, it was, and forgetting the guy who did it, something Ford, I don't know, but it was 1980. Like that's a long time, that's so much different than college football now. So anyway, I know that these schools are going to want unequal revenue share. I know that Florida State has a huge ego, but guess what? Like, they kind of deserve to have a big ego if they're in the Big 12, And I know a lot of Big 12 fans. There's some that are just really protective of anyone saying anything negative about their league or the perception of the league. I don't share that. Like, I think it can be reasonably argued right now today, in July of 2024, that the ACC is a better conference than the Big 12. Oh my gosh, Mark, but no one else is saying that. Everyone's saying the Big 12 is definitely better than the ACC right now. Look, the ACC has Florida State and Clemson and Miami right now. The Big 12 does not. The Big 12 lost Oklahoma and Texas. And I get that maybe from a conference meeting room standpoint and everyone, being on the same page standpoint and the kumbaya standpoint, sure, it's better to not have those schools. But, once you start playing on Saturdays and you don't have a national championship, a legitimate national championship contender most seasons, you're going to want one in your conference, And so I just do not, I'm just not afraid of bringing them in. And maybe part of it's just because as an ASU fan right now, like we're just trying to get out of the mud. So having, if Florida State and Clemson were in the conference this year, like, oh no, like we're not going to get past them. It's like, well, we're not going to get past them anyway right now. So I get that I'm kind of coming at this from a nothing to lose perspective. Well, I'm not kind of, I am coming at this with a nothing to lose perspective because I don't really, I'm not holding on to anything of the previous Big 12, right? We were not in the previous Big 12, so there's nothing to hold on to. It's not like I'm Kansas State or Iowa State or one of these teams. It's like, oh, we could win the conference, multiple years. If Florida State comes in, that'll screw it up. It's like, oh, well, we're not in that position right now anyway. So I think it's just good to have more better teams in the conference and to who cares what they do in, the Big 12 meeting rooms or president's rooms or whatever. Like, if the Big 12 could re-add Texas and Oklahoma, they would do it, And so it's fine. Like, I don't care that they don't want to be, they're not like enthusiastic about going to the Big 12, ASU wasn't enthusiastic about going to the Big 12. Utah certainly was not enthusiastic about going to the Big 12. Guess what? They're still in the Big 12. So like I don't need Florida State and Clemson to come in and be humble. Like, oh, you're doing it our way now that you're in the Big 12. It's like, okay. Like I just don't, if you're the Big 12, you need anchor tenants, ever since all this conference realignment stuff has happened, the best analogy I've heard about it is every conference is like a mall and the blue bloods, the powers are the anchor tenants, right? Like the Macy's, the JC Penney, the huge stores that historically would get people to come to the mall. What's the anchor tenant in the Big 12 right now? Utah, K-State, Oklahoma State. Those are good. Like it's like a hot topic or a I can't think of any. I don't know. Lids. Those are good, solid stores that you stop by. The Bath and Body Works store at the mall. Those are like good, solid stores you stop by, but like not the anchor. It's not Nordstrom. It's not Macy's or whatever. And those would be Clemson and Florida State would be two huge anchor tenants. And another kind of thing to say is like the fact that they don't want to come to the Big 12 is all the more reason that the Big 12 should really want them to come to their conference, right? Like the fact that because they I think rightly from a competition, football standpoint, they deserve to be in the SEC based on their what they've done as programs, right? And so, of course, those schools want to go to the SEC. Of course they want to go to the Big 12, Big 10. But, for various reasons, as laid out by Brett McMurphy, is, just people don't like dealing with FSU's messiness. Maybe the Big 10 and SEC don't want them. I still ultimately believe those schools will end up in one of those two conferences. At Florida State and Clemson to the Big 12, it still feels too good to be true. That's what I would say. It still feels too good to be true. But that feeling has faded. That feeling has faded in the past week, just with more and more reporting that's come out, right? Like it's definitely on the table. And I don't think Brett Yormark is thinking this way. I think Brett Yormark 100% wants them to come in. I think this might be some athletic directors and university presidents that kind of get a little, sheepish and like, oh, like, I don't know. Oh, they might, Florida State might be disruptive in our conference. It's like, well, they might also go 12-0 and, be a top 2 seed in the playoff, right? Like, I know I just don't want to be 5 years later. And I guess this is such a dumb hypothetical because I don't think the Big 12, when it all really, like, if this actually was a possibility for them, I don't think they'd ever turn down Florida State and Clemson. So let's throw that out there. But like, just from what I've heard from some of the fans and like some of the Big 12 related journalists, it's like, oh, well, they're not going to do things our way. And it's like, okay, well, you might have a bunch of 9-3 teams winning the league and maybe winning one game in the playoff. Like, what's worse for your league? Like that or Florida State and Clemson throwing a hissy fit sometimes because, Florida State's upset they have to play a whatever, like a late night game in Tempe one time and they get upset about it. It's like, I don't know. Like, maybe you should kind of cater to them, right? Like maybe you should. And it probably wouldn't, stop them from leaving for another conference, but at least you have them, you know. I just don't know how much of a position of strength the Big 12 really is in this. Because, again, this is their fallback plan. This is not their. I think McMurphy had a great sentence in his article. I'm looking for it now. Here we go. The only problem, Florida State and Clemson aren't currently that enamored with the Big 12. But then again, neither were Utah and Arizona State until they saw the Pac-12 crumbling before their eyes. And look where they ended up. Desperate times call for desperate measures. So, again, this is all under the assumption that the Big 10 and SEC just don't want them. Which still, I just can't totally wrap my head around that. Especially after what we heard last year about the Big 10 in Washington and Oregon. That has to be considered in all of this. So maybe it'll be a situation where, I don't know, maybe the Big 12 like pries out Louisville first. And then like Louisville and Virginia Tech come first, and then gets everyone scrambling, and then somehow the SEC takes Florida State and Clemson. And the thing with this whole story is the one thing that has become clear is that Florida State and Clemson are not the two most attractive brands from a conference like TV standpoint, they're the top two attractive football programs, but it looks like North Carolina and Virginia are the top two most attractive brands, right? Because both of those schools offer things from a brand standpoint. I'm talking overall brand, not football, overall. They're both AAU accredited, which the Big Ten cares about. We can argue whether they should care about it or they don't, but they do. So there's that. And they're also in new states that the Big Ten and the SEC don't have, particularly the SEC, right? If like that's pretty much the only two southern states that aren't represented in the SEC. There's not one school in North Carolina and not one school in Virginia. And Virginia Tech would make more sense as an SEC school, but like being the university of is a big deal in these, and I think that plays a big role in it. So, I'm not the one reporting I don't have any inside information on all this, but the fact that it's been pretty clear that North Carolina and Virginia are the two most like holistically attractive schools in the ACC from the Big Ten and SEC standpoint is it's a very interesting nugget of news because you never see any rumors of the Big 12 going after North Carolina or Virginia because they just don't see it as worthwhile. So what's the point of wasting all this time going after those schools if they know for a fact that they'll have a spot in the top two leagues. So I guess my ultimate takeaway with this is one, it's crazy that this is even a legitimate option, and this isn't like message board stuff or solely anonymous accounts. Like this is clearly within the realm of possibility, and I'd put it at like 35%. Adding these two schools potentially would make the Big 12 the clear number 3 conference, and it would shrink the gap immensely with whoever the number 2 conference is, right? It would shrink the gap immensely because, again, you have two bona fide national championship contenders. And then you also have a good depth as well, right? You don't have the Vanderbilts, the Indianas, right? Maybe someone could say that ASU currently is that. Again, we'll see. I mean, maybe ASU just stays in the mud forever. I don't think that's going to happen, but it's possible, sadly. So there's that. And the third thing is just, I think they're worth the risk to bring in. I get that they might not be the most easy to deal with partner. They may not be super enthusiastic to join the league. All of this. Guess what? Utah and Arizona State joining the league, despite not being the most enthusiastic partners, made the Big 12 better. On the field, particularly with Utah at this point, and then also just from a reach and branding standpoint, now at being, adding Phoenix and then adding Salt Lake and just adding every big entity from those two states. So even if Florida State and Clemson aren't like begging to get into the league the way some Big 12 fans would like schools to go in, they're still a worthy ad. And I've heard one scenario, and this might actually, who knows, this could be more likely than people think, is Florida State and Clemson go independent and they have like a scheduling agreement with the Big 12, a la Oregon State and Washington having a scheduling agreement with the Mountain West until they kind of get things more lined down. I would be fine with that because that it doesn't solve the overall issue of the Big 12 not having blue bloods, but it does just strengthen your overall schedule if you're playing a Florida State, if you're playing a Clemson on a regular basis. So we'll see. It's crazy that this is even a possibility, and it's not a long shot. I have some interesting tweets to read from MHVR3, who He's a West Virginia fan on social media. Clearly has some connections. 31,000 followers on Twitter. He's tweeting specific stuff, and we read his stuff on the last show too. So this is from Wednesday. This first tweet, and I'm just going to read them all and kind of see how I feel. After Big 12 has financial for private equity to show FSU and Clemson. Valuation is close to 2.5 billion, 20% stake. So the 2.5 billion of the private equity is a 20% stake in the Big 12. This would be when you add in Florida State, Clemson, and then it goes on. Adding those two plus NC State / Virginia Tech. ESPN and Fox will agree to pro rata for those additions as well. So really, like, that's some specific stuff. Like that is implying the ball is down the road on this. Next tweet. Other schools ESPN and Fox would approve pro rata for: Miami, Louisville, Pitt, Georgia Tech, Duke. Then parentheses, ESPN will approve any current P4 school plus Pac-2 schools. So Oregon State, Washington State are still alive in this. And I would be fine with adding them. I would not want to add, like, they shouldn't be added before some of these other schools, right? I would say all the ACC schools that I mentioned should be given preference before those two. But I would also add those two before you're adding like a Pitt or a G5 or whatever. B12 got valuations with multiple different combinations of 2 and 4 schools as well. This is craziest rumor alert. A reliable source from SEC country told me that SEC has had membership talks with a few very high-profile Big Ten schools within the past 6 months. Grain of salt, but alert, but wanted to share. This could shake CFB to its very core. Man, I just don't believe that. I believe it, but I believe that maybe there have been some talks. I just don't think that would actually happen. Like, why are you leaving the Big Ten at this point? That's just, I don't know. And then this is from earlier today, 3 hours ago. ESPN has indicated to the ACC that the loss of two or more, so it could just be 2, of FSU, UNC, UVA, Clemson, Miami / Duke, if you lose 2 or more of those schools, will result in their option in 2027 not being picked up by the network. So basically, ESPN is saying if 2 of those schools leave, then your contract isn't getting renewed. So that's interesting. And again, who knows? And then earlier today also, 90 seconds to ACC midnight, ACC doomsday clock. And then in other news, ACC and Big 12 by default grant of rights will soon be public record. So, it's still, who knows how much to trust MHVR3 on Twitter, but he's clear, like he was ahead of the Pac-12 breaking, or the LA schools leaving the Pac-12. So he has some credibility, and if you were just specifically listening to him, you would think this is far more down the road than anyone else. And, maybe it ends up being that, who knows? So it's certainly within the realm of possibility, and we'll just have to see how it plays out. And overall, like, I'll just end it by saying, like, if the Big 12 can get this done, get this done. I don't care about, we're not the most conference with the most parity anymore. Like, that's what we used to say in the Pac-12, and look where the Pac-12 ended up. Don't try to sell me on parity being the number one reason, because the reason it's number one is because you don't have an alpha. You don't have the top, national championship winning capability program that would, render parity useless, because they're just way better than a lot of teams, So I think, adding those 2 would be worth it. They'd be worth the behind the scenes headaches, if just for perception alone. Because if you add those 2, the Big 12 is perceived much differently as a football conference, whether you like it or not, So it's crazy that this is even, I'm still blown away that this is even a reality for the Big 12. So we'll see. some ASU basketball news. They're putting together their non-conference schedule. It is not finalized just yet, but they added an interesting game for this season. I'm looking at the Sun Devils website right now. ASU men's hoops draws UMass at Hall of Fame Classic. So they're going to play basically like this is the Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame announced the field of teams for the 2024 Basketball Hall of Fame Classic, highlighted by ASU. The Basketball Hall of Fame Classic will take place on Saturday, December 21st at the Mass Mutual Center. Details surrounding the game and so which will be in Springfield, Massachusetts. More details will be announced. So this is pretty cool. I mean, and UMass was a pretty good team last year. And the other game in this is Rhode Island versus Temple. So ASU is definitely the biggest brand. They got a quote here. Hosting the Hall of Fame. No, they don't say anything about ASU. So, but that's a good matchup. UMass was a good team last year. And I mean, they're really, Hurley is really kind of picking up some good opponents in the non-conference schedule. I know they scheduled another game. They scheduled a game versus Florida State, actually, to Arizona State, Florida State basketball. It's Florida. Okay, so not Florida State. Previously announced games, November 14th, they played GCU in Phoenix. Then 2 weeks after that, they play New Mexico in the Palm Springs Acrisure Classic. November 29th, they would play either St. Mary's or USC in that same tournament. And then all the way in December 21st, they play UMass. Florida basketball. So ASU will play Florida basketball as well in Atlanta on December 14th in the State Farm Center in Atlanta, where the Atlanta Hawks play. So now, like you just look at you're already playing in the Big 12, and then you have a non-con of GCU, New Mexico, either St. Mary's or USC, UMass, and Florida already. That's some interesting games for the Sun Devils, no doubt. And again, if you do well, you win, I don't know, 60% of those games against the good teams that you play in the non-con, like that sets you up, that gives you a lot of wiggle room in the Big 12. And so I like this from Bobby, and it's not like all of these teams are beatable, all of these, it's not like you're playing Duke with Cooper Flag, you are playing UMass, St. Mary's, New Mexico, GCU, and Florida. All good teams of good brands, teams that would help your resume, but not impossible to beat either. So if anyone from ASU basketball is listening, maybe one more good out of conference game and then filled up with NAU and Eastern Washington, Grambling State, filled up with those schools. Once you maybe get one more high profile opponent on the non-con. So yeah. Again, it's great to go into an ASU basketball season and actually have some hope, have some legitimate hope. And I mean, this is the most excited I've been going into an ASU basketball season since, I don't know. I mean, maybe, oh gosh, maybe ever. There might have been one year. No, I can't even say that because I guess maybe the year Lou Dort was coming in. So maybe the 2018-19 season, or was that 2020? I don't even remember. It's been a while. It's been like 5 years. So, and even then, I don't think I was this excited. So, yeah, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Please rate and review on your podcast platform of choice. Like and subscribe on YouTube. Please follow the College Huddle Podcast Network. And as always, go Devils.